Hi folks, Bill Lappe here from Master Model Makers. I want to welcome you to the first episode of Resin Maniacs TV. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. David Fisher, world-renowned painter and godfather of the garage kit industry.
I'm David Fisher, and I am co-publisher of Amazing Figure Modeler magazine, and I also produced some video DVDs and videotapes called Model Mania.
What do you like doing better, actually, the models or videotape them at the same time? What is, I mean, we'll start off with that. I mean, you're a man of many tasks, sometimes artists wear many hats. What's your favorite hat to wear?
My favorite hat to wear, I'd say painter. You know, I like to paint and model and kit bash and sculpt, all the creative part of it. Which, you know, publishing is also creative as well, but it's a different, you know, you're sitting at a computer wiggling a mouse, so it's not as much fun as modeling kits.
We all started off, I'm assuming, as kids. How old were you when you started? What was your favorite kit to make as a kid?
I got my first model kit when I was 4 years old. It was the Batman, and, or no, I take that back, it was Dracula.
Oh.
I was with my cousin in Florida, I got Dracula, got home, then I got the Batman maybe like a year or so later, because I was really into the TV show at the time, and grabbed every Aurora kit I could get my hands on. You know,
It's strange because every guy that I've talked to, we all seem to gravitate to the same things. I did the military models for a while. But my love always went back to the Aurora Kids.
right?
Do you have any kids?
No.
Okay. The reason why I ask you is I have 4 kids. How do you see this going forward with the kids today? They're so caught up with these video games. How does this help them, or is it a detriment to our business?
You know, I think it's important for kids, if they're around parents that model, they'll probably pick it up. A lot of times they do. But kids are just not gravitating to models anymore. They don't want to build things with their hands. They can go to the store and buy an action figure if they want something like a Batman. They don't have to build it. So it really is important, I think, for parents to impress upon kids the creativity that they're missing out on. To be able to say, I built that, to put that up on your shelf and brag to all your friends, you know, I did that, you know. You lose that if you buy stuff. You know.
I met you, I guess back in the Chiller days maybe, and I didn't know you well. This is like 91, 92.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you get into the kits on a professional level back then? I say professional because nobody else was doing it, and all of a sudden this venue opened up for us.
Right. I kind of fell into it. It was sort of accidental because I had an ad agency. And so I did modeling kind of just for a hobby, just something to relax and forget about work all day. And I remember I came to a Wonderfest, I think it was their second show, and I didn't know there was a contest. So I'm walking around, I see this stuff, and my wife's going, you know, you bring some kits next year and enter them. So the next year I brought a few, and this is when they didn't have open category, it was just like first, second, and third. And I remember when they got to the horror category, they called me up. They said, third place, David Fisher. I was like, oh man, you know, I was like excited. I go up, and so then the guy goes, it was Lee State, and he goes, you might as well keep standing up here because you also got second and first. And it was just like, what? You know? So Terry Webb comes up to me. You know, he was working on Model Toy Collector. He's like, you need to be writing for the magazine. So at that show, I won those awards. He asked me to write for the magazine. And it literally changed the whole career of my life. You know, I went from, I mean, it was like a hobby turned suddenly kind of into a semi-business, and then people were like, want me to paint for hire. And it wasn't something I saw. If I tried to do this, it would have never happened, you know.
You know, that's funny. You don't realize what you and him did. It was really, you launched the whole industry indirectly because you brought it. There was no internet. Monster Times was around, maybe, if you were lucky.
Well, what was really funny was, you know, Model Toy Collector at the time was a completely black and white magazine. Here I am doing a painting article. And so I'm describing, you know, I painted it red, and I'd have to describe what the red was like, you know, the color of rust, or, you know. So it was sort of like really strange, but I did all these painting articles in black and white for years until we started our own magazine.
I think the mecca for us, well, at least for me and John and whoever else was there, was the '93 Forrest J. Ackerman Famous Monsters of Filmland.
Yeah.
Whatever, I don't know how many more letters we could put on that title, but I remember it being a very family atmosphere. Can you talk about that a little bit? We'll get into a second part of it, but why did you go there, and tell us about the contest that was there, and what was good about that?
Well, it was interesting because that Famous Monsters convention, that was when they first were sort of kind of re-established themselves and come back into publishing. And so it was like a really big deal, and I thought, I want to go to that, because growing up on Famous Monsters, I mean, we all did it. It was like, you know, blood to me. So when I found out about the convention, we decided to drive up. It was like a 21-hour drive for us, and they had a contest. And I thought that'll be fun to enter, so I took a few pieces, and it was just like an amazing show. You know, there were so many people there, actors and family members of actors and things, and so it was a really. But the contest was kind of cool because it wasn't a model show, so it was exposing these types of things to people that had no idea that these things were out or available. It kind of gave garage kits a whole new audience that hadn't happened before. You know.
Like yourself, I had a Nego wall of many first, second, bronze places from other shows, but it all mattered that I came in second place and I lost to you. Tell me about, tell me or the audience, what was it like for, like, if I saw you at a show back then, I'm like, yo, Dave, how'd you do that? You told me. Most people, well, what do you want to know? It was like a secretive business. Yeah. So talk about how it was secretive and competitive, and today it is a little bit of that. It lingers, but not as much. Elaborate a little bit about that.
That's something I never really understood as far as talking about it being a secretive thing. There's not a technique I've learned or done that somebody else hasn't done before me. It's just a matter of maybe they did it on another type of kit, or maybe they did it on a painting. I used to be an illustrator. I went into some illustration work, so I had some experience with color and shading and whatever, so I just kind of took what I knew from that, from two-dimensional, and did it to three-dimensional. And I was excited to tell anybody how it wasn't like I was bragging or whatever. I just thought, hey, if you want to know, I'll tell you. And I actually had a few guys, I won't name names, but I had a few guys actually kind of get mad at me. Like, why are you telling everybody this? Now they're going to all come back with... And I think, well, if you don't do it, then people are going to get frustrated. They're not going to keep modeling. And then the thing's going to die a quick death. So I felt like by helping people paint better, it was extending the life of the hobby.
Amen. Plus, you want to beat the best. You don't want to beat people who aren't progressing, and then you want to compete against people who are going to drive you to be better, I guess.
Well, and I guess it's kind of weird too because I've never been a competitive person, so I never felt threatened. I never wanted to beat anybody. It wasn't my intention. I literally, people may not believe it, but I literally just wanted people to see my work because I was always doing it at my house. No one ever saw it. Neighbors, or no one ever saw it. So I thought it'll be fun to take it and just get people's reactions. I had no expectations of winning anything.
See, that's what I think. There was a faction that's what it was. Oh, I got to get first place, and that's what you did was open it up to make it more. It's a sharing process. It's a brotherhood, sisterhood now, because there aren't many women involved, but there are women and now
sure.
Kids involved.
Yeah.
So getting back to what were your painting influences? Not necessarily, maybe as an illustrator, and then even as a painter of kits. Where did you get your inspiration from painting these kits?
I think my inspiration from painting kits just came from, like I say, going to art school and learning techniques and painting. It wasn't necessarily a specific artist that influenced me, but just knowing techniques, dry brushing and airbrushing and things that I had learned in school to do, like I say, for illustrative purposes. I was just kind of taking those. And I think where I kind of got my notoriety was because I was building bases and dioramas for things, and nobody had really been doing much of that. It was sort of like people were just getting these garage kits and building them and putting them just on the table. And then I show up and mine's in a laboratory or a dungeon or something. So it kind of like made people go, oh, you can do this. I never thought about that. It seemed like a logical progression from the Aurora Kids.
Absolutely, because if you remember, even the Aurora Kids, that famous Monsters issue that I love, 32, that was all about dioramas, and Lance Herpich was on the cover, and that's compelled me to today. That's not my story, but what I'm saying is, get into the kits. A lot of them were well produced, but a lot of them you needed 3D glasses to look at because the process was in its infancy. We didn't know how to make molds, and if you did, the molds would burn out. Talk about how you really had to be a painter back then to get the image onto these. Now, today, it's almost like painting by the numbers. The kits are so clean.
Yeah.
So about that.
I think, and maybe the likenesses weren't as good back then or whatever. I think, for me, I can remember a lot of guys would approach me to paint kits for a show. It was always right before a show, you get these phone calls from people. And it would be like, I've got this kit, character B, character C, whatever. And the likeness isn't quite right, but I know, and because I was an illustrator, I could cheat some things with paint. You can't sculpt with paint, but you could maybe take a a 90%, 85, 90% their likeness and push it further to where it looked a lot more like the character. And in some ways it was misleading. You know, I'd get people going, "Oh, I got the kid and it didn't look a thing like your paint up," you know. But at the same time, I thought it's helping them out, and it is. You are able to do it if you just have that skill. So there was some of that. I can remember. I won't name specifics, but I can remember certain kits where, you know, I probably did kind of make it look better than it should have, or something where people might have felt a little misled. But
Well, I don't see it as misleading. What it is I think it's interpretation. Like, I think my biggest thing, I don't know if you shared the same thought, is like when you put a model out there, it's like putting a kid out and say, "You like my son?" And usually people, "Oh, what a cute baby." But when you're in model business, it's like, "What an ugly freaking kid you got." You know, they'll tell you to your face, you know. But so being an artist is very interpretive.
Right.
And it might look like crap to somebody else, but to you, that's the memory that you had in your head or what you come out. So I can understand that.
Yeah.
Getting to that now, where do you see the future with these kits? And what I mean by that is, do you see it as a detriment, like with the 3D printing and stuff? Do you see it as helping us? Do you see it as, oh God, this is a new, it's like, is it what sound did for movies? What's going to happen next in the future?
Yeah, I think for the future, I mean, with all the new techniques, you can look at it two different ways. You know, for sculptors, especially old school sculptors, the 3D sculpting is terrifying. They're watching their careers kind of walk out the door for a lot of hired work, unless they catch on and start doing it. And a lot of them have. But to me, it's just a tool. It's like anything else. You know, I have, and people may not like what I'm about to say, but to me, if somebody sets a block of clay in front of you with some tools and you can't sculpt something out of it, you're not a sculptor. What you do on the computer, it's sculpting in a way, but it's like, it'd be the same thing as saying it's painting it on the computer. It's a different technique, but to me, it's like the programs and the brushes and the different things they can use enable them to create. Where to me, it's like if you're not able to take something and actually do it with your hands, to me, it's not sculpting. That's maybe a little controversial, but at the same time, I think the 3D stuff is great. I've worked on a lot of pieces that have been produced that way, and they're phenomenal. So, and there's detail that probably machine type detail, like armor, things that maybe just could not have been done by hand, at least not to that precision. So it's got its place. I'm not knocking it at all, but it's got its place.
Moving on to the future that we spoke, let's talk about your latest projects and what's new for the magazine, whatever order you want to, you know.
Well, you know, for the future, you know, the magazine, you know, we have every intention of to continue to publish as long as the hobby wants us. You know, I mean, I love doing it. Everybody knows print is, I won't say it's dying, but once again, just like every other market with technology, it's changing. And our avenues for selling the magazine are dwindling. You know, lots of hobby shops have gone under. When we first started the magazine, we used to do what we called a direct-to-store contract. And we probably had at one time 75, 80 stores that we sold directly to, not counting distribution and all the other stuff. And you know, it's dwindled considerably because all these hobby shops are gone, you know. So it's kind of sad, but it's just the fact. But the magazine, we still have a great readership. The subscriber base is really strong. And Terry and I we've always been enthused about it. So neither of us have any intention of going anywhere until the hobby just says we don't want you anymore. You know, there's going to come a day where we're just going to wake up and go, nobody is around anymore, possibly. I hope not. But for that, you know, I want to continue it as long as possible. And then for myself, you know, I still do hired work. I work a lot with companies that are now doing pre-paints. That's more of a bigger market. So I'm doing a lot of the pre-paints which they send to China to be copied. And it's a nice little thriving business to be doing, you know.
Any particular, I don't know if you want to mention, any specific paint that you like to use? Do you like oil paint? Do you like to use pastels? And is there something that you hate?
It's everything. I mean, I like to use, I mean, pastels are great. You can do a lot. I love to do washes. I love airbrush. I mean, I like it all, you know, I really do. There's not any specific brands that I'm loyal to. I find, you know, every paint is usable at some, you know, from a craft paint to a really expensive hobby paint. They're all going to work, you know. So it depends on how comfortable you are mixing your own colors versus trying to buy the specific color. I'm a mixer, you know. I have a very small palette of colors, but I mix from those. But a lot of people want to buy straight from the bottle, which is not a bad idea, especially if you're doing something like hired work where you may have to do touch-ups down the road, it's really hard sometimes to mix that color back up, but if you can go straight to a bottle with it, so it's got its place.
When you first started painting, Dave,
Yeah.
airbrushing, I mean,
Yeah.
like back in the day, there wasn't a lot of guys doing airbrushing.
No.
A lot of us were hand brushing because we didn't know how. When did you first start airbrushing?
I learned some of it in art school. I had a teacher that was a really good airbrush artist. He did a lot of book covers and things. They didn't really teach it, but I was like, I want to learn how to airbrush. So he taught me, and I hated it. I couldn't stand it. So when I started modeling, I really looked for everything I could do to avoid using an airbrush. I just did not want to use one. And I tried it for a while, but when you get into girl kits and things where you want those smooth skin tones, you just had no other choice, I thought, but to airbrush. But then I started discovering pastels, and you can do a lot of techniques that look very similar, without using an airbrush. And I've kind of done a couple things lately where I've limited myself to not using an airbrush at all. Like I just did the Blackheart Nosferatu, the big head.
No airbrush.
I didn't touch an airbrush on it. I did it all by hand. I'm going to see if I can do a life-size head by hand, and I did. I'm not saying it couldn't have looked better if I had used an airbrush, but I think it was pretty reasonable. I was pretty proud of it. So
When you're a scratch builder and we built dioramas, explain to the audience how you gotta have an eye. You could be somewhere and see something and don't know why you need that piece.
Yeah.
And put it in your pocket or put it home, and then
Right.
3 years later you're like, I know where it is.
Yeah.
Explain how you gotta be a dumpster diver when you're building dioramas, whether
I think with dioramas, you've got to, if you're really into building them, and you always kind of start training your eye to look for things that can be used for something else. So like you said, a bottle cap, if it's the right shape, you think that could be the top of a computer thing, or whatever. So you start thinking in that way, and you start accumulating. I've got just tubs and tubs of things. And it's funny because there's a little hardware store that's not too far from where I live, and I'll go in there sometimes to buy odd things that I can find. And they follow you around. It's like a little old man, and they follow you around in there. And I was in there one day and I was picking up something. You can't use that with that. You need that's metric, and this is standard. And I'm like, I'm not going to use it for that. You don't understand. It's going to be for my diorama. And he doesn't know what I'm talking about. And they're looking at me like I'm crazy, But that's the thing. You kind of train your eye. And I'll be walking down the road and I'll find something on the ground like an old spring, and I'm like, I'll take that and use that, So I miss it because I love to do that type of stuff. That's the most creative part for me. Painting is fun, but it's like building and creating. It really, when you make it your own, when it becomes an original piece that no one else is going to have one like it. That's what I think is fun.
Yeah.
And the thing about painting is, and doing this type of work, I think you always learn. I think every project, in a way, you kind of learn something. There's not a thing I've painted that I look at and think I couldn't do it better if I did it again. Because you learn from it, and then you think, okay, I should have done this on it, I should have done that on it. And I find that if I go to a contest, I learn from other people. I mean, people think they're learning from me, but I learn from them too. I walk up and I see stuff, and I think, I would have never thought to do that. It's always a learning process.
Yeah.
And I think the more you absorb of it, the better. So I like to think I'm improving. I mean, I look back on stuff I did a few years ago and I cringe. People are like, you should sell your paint-ups on eBay, and I'm like, I'm almost embarrassed to, because I'd be afraid for somebody to have an old piece and go, David Fisher painted that, But I guess that's a good thing to know, that you maybe can improve no matter what level you're at. So, I like all the mediums of modeling. I mean, it's funny, I know a lot of guys, including a lot of our writers, hate styrene. It's really like pulling teeth to get some guys to do styrene. And I like it because I guess I built so many as a kid that it's nostalgic for me. So I have no problem sitting there and sanding and seaming and all that. Like the Def Dealer, well, of course he was a prototype, but still I like the styrene stuff. And then resin, you can't beat resin. Resin's the best. It's just, it holds the detail. Most of the time it's easy to work with. Guys have gotten so sophisticated with their casting nowadays that resin's a breeze most of the time. I can remember back in the day, I won't name names, but I was working on a particular kit, and when I was done with cleaning it up and taking all the pour spout stuff, I had a bigger pile of stuff I was going to throw away than the actual parts of the kit. And that's kind of the way it was in the early, because everybody was learning. No one really knew how to cast, so it was like a lot of learn by trial and error. But vinyl was great. but vinyl had its pitfalls too. You know, they would sometimes wilt, or you had to fill them and do different things. But vinyl was great. But I'd say really, I guess resin. You know, that's what we're all here for. Resin's king. You know.
Anybody you want to give a kudos to as far as how the industry is moving forward and who's been, you know, whether it's a specific builder, painter, or producer that's really helping to push on?
Oh, I mean, you can look downstairs and see a lot of guys that are really pushing the hobby forward. I mean, you know, John and you know, George Stevenson. George Stevenson's been there since the very beginning. I mean, you got to say this guy's like, to me, you pick a godfather. Terry's probably, my partner Terry Webb is probably the godfather of the hobby. He really got it going. But George is probably right behind on his heels. And Mike Parks back in the day. But you know, what amazes me is I look around downstairs and I look through the magazine and what comes in. And every time it seems like there's a really great piece, a lot of times, or a milestone piece, you know, Jeff Yeager's name's attached to it half the time. And he's been there since I think he did do the first American Garage Kit. And all these years later, here he is still working at it and doing great work. So I have to say Jeff's a great leader of the hobby. I mean, not leader, but you know, I guess in a way he is a leader.
Maybe you guys should start a Hall of Fame for me.
You know, we've talked about it. You know, it's something that we've thought about doing, and it'd be kind of cool to maybe have something in the magazine where people can even vote. You know, like, you know, maybe have some names. But there's a certain group of people that I think automatically just get in. You know, they've been around for a long time, and I'm amazed how many of them are still here. And I walk around downstairs, and there's John Dennett. You know, there's George Stevenson, the other in the room. You know, it's just it's interesting. All these years, and I'm talking almost 30 years. You know, I've been doing this since 1992 in some form or fashion. As far as maybe a little earlier than that. Yeah, I think 92. Yeah. So here we are, all these years later. You know, older and grayer.